Throughout my life, I've come to find that the question of fear is something still in the minds of many. We desire it, we seek it out, and sometimes we regret having found it. It's also something that we are passionately curious about. What scares us? What scares others? It's something oddly satisfying to achieve. That we might scare others by simply leaping out and screaming boo, or that we might implant that feeling of dread. For some, that part is easy to do as they have a well to draw from. Their most horrible nightmare that nibbles away at their mind, something they can use to base that story upon. I have a similar tale to tell. I only wish it was embellished after what I came to see just a little bit ago. A nightmare from my past I thought I'd left behind. Growing up near a heritage branch line is something not a lot of children my age could say. But me and my friends were lucky indeed to have such a thing growing up. It felt like we were living in the times of our grandparents, where other youths trudged to school on a crowded, filthy bus. We took the train from our small countryside station to the town where we attended school. Me and my friends enjoyed our time living there, exploring every bend of track and every hill in the countryside, until one by one we moved away, as is sometimes normal. While moving away is typically a sad event, I couldn't wait to get away from the place. Now it shouldn't be said it's not because I didn't value the railway using old steam engines, nor did I find the efforts of volunteers wasteful, though it seems that didn't help them keep their line open, having heard it closed a few years ago. I much enjoyed the company of the engines and railway staff too. They were kind and filled with such amazing stories in their long careers in the years leading up to the beaching reports. But the discovery of a sad, sordid history on the line made me lose a bit of its attraction. When I was a lad, I had just become interested in history, in particular the sorry, sad parts of history. I remember me and my friends discussing for days about the corner bakery in our small village, where it was once rumored the woman baker who owned it in the 1700s once served a meat pie made from the remains of her husband. We also talked about how it was rumored that the disused munitions factories still clung to the bodies of the men who were crushed by falling rubble during the Second World War. You know, the more gruesome parts of history. I'll admit, I was a rather strange youth. As I mentioned, me and my friends had a habit of exploring the countryside around the railway. Our village was where the main sheds of the railway were located, but the line didn't end at the main sheds. They continued further up into the hills to an abandoned coal mine. We always wanted to explore there, but our parents were always concerned about us venturing too close without them by our side for fear we'd trip down an old mine shaft or come across a sinkhole and be swallowed alive. A distance away from the mine, there was an old engine shed. Our parents were a little more at ease with us exploring here, but they said if we ever did, we would need to tell the station master that we would be there. Mr. Brigson was an ancient man who had lived in the village even before the beaching report closed the branch line. He certainly made our grandparents look old even. He was old and a bit spooky to look at, but the man was always kind yet firm. Much like a loving grandfather in a way. We talked with his grandchildren, who were first years in primary school when this story took place. Nice children they were. Whenever we would go exploring in the hills outside our village during summer holiday, we always passed by the station, so Mr. Brigson knew where to tell our parents we were. He was very accommodating to our youthful adventures, allowing us to wander as he felt kids should be raised outside, rather than sitting around at home watching the telly. But he always reminded us to never stay around that shed after sunset. And if we should disobey his warning, he'd make sure we'd be grounded for a month. I'm not sure if he ever had that power, but we never questioned it. The shed itself, and the mine, had a lot of history, though it seemed like some people didn't even want to talk about it. Many just said simply, "What's to know? It's a mine." They mined coal till the seam dried up, then beaching closed it up. I don't know how I knew, but it seemed that the adults were hiding something. I asked some of the engines if they knew the stories of the mine, but sadly they didn't know anything. They had all been bought by the heritage line from other railways far away. Even the village library didn't seem to have anything on the mine, beyond being named in a National Coal Board report on what mines were now deemed obsolete. My friends soon tired of trying to figure out the mystery of the mine, and began to instead joke on how I seemed to stick with it. Called it my white elephant story, if you will. One of them, I forget who, came up with the idea that if I was so desperate to find answers, maybe I should go to the shed at night. Perhaps, they reasoned, you'll find what happens since Mr. Brixton always tells us to never go there at sundown. If I had been a little braver, maybe I would have said no to such an idea, but I caved as my friends teased me about it. Then, the same friend who suggested I go also suggested that I take my parents' new video camera and film myself there. That way, they would know that I had gone there since they were too scared to do it themselves. I wasn't sure, since I was positive my parents would ground me if they found out I'd borrowed their camera. But, once again, after being pestered about it, I went along with it. On the evening of October 10th, we arranged a sort of fictional sleepover situation to say I was spending the night with a friend that night. This way, I could make my way to the mine without worrying my parents as to where I was. I left my parents' house around 7 o'clock and made my way to the engine sheds where I would follow the old line up to the mine. After making sure that no one, especially not Mr. Brixton, saw me, I was off. The walk up to the mine was somewhat easy as the sleepers of the railway leading up to it were still in place and the moon shone overhead as well as my torchlight. It took something like 20 minutes of hiking along uneven ballast rock and sleepers before I came to the mine and the old engine shed. By this time, the mist had grown thicker and made the whole mine look even spookier. I couldn't place it, but it felt like something was telling me I shouldn't be here. I shrugged it off as just my overactive imagination, and taking the camera from my bag, I began to film my walk up to the shed. The old engine shed looked deeper and darker than I felt it should have been given the moonlight. It was as if the inside was a black hole, sucking away any light that came close to it. I could have left then, but I had a feeling my friends would not be satisfied that I'd come this far and turned to tail running. So, feeling this was a horrible mistake, I stepped inside. My torch shined all around the inside, looking over the rotten wooden workbench and rafters and overhead lights covered in cobwebs. It seemed very quiet inside the shed, save for the sounds of a noisy cricket and a hooting owl. I sighed, feeling that I had wasted the walk up here, and began to tell myself how foolish I was for thinking I'd find something in this dark engine shed that I had explored well enough during the day, when a sudden electrical buzz filled the air, followed by a brief flash of light. I thought for a moment that it could have been lightning, and then worried about walking down the line when I remembered it was clear outside. No rain, no clouds. Then the light flashed again. I looked up this time to see the old light bulbs flicker overhead and the filaments inside go fading from orange to darkness. This struck me as strange given that I knew the old mine had no electricity anymore. The lights overhead flickered again, and again, and again, in rapid succession. As I looked at the lights, I swore I could see a shadowy form taking shape. Then the lights came on for a full minute, and I stared up in shock as I saw a swinging, shadowy form. It looked vaguely human-shaped. Not once did I think to raise my camera up as I was frozen in horror, staring up at this shadowy shape that my mind said resembled a hanging man. I almost felt like I could hear the sound of rope creaking with every sway of the thing. Then the lights winked out, and the sound and shape vanished into darkness. It was too much. I turned and I ran out of that shed, stumbling over some bushes as I bolted into the bright moonlight with only the sounds of my breathing and shoes crunching along the ballast rocks for company as I ran home. I spent the night sleeping in our garden shed as I had no house key. The next morning, I carefully left the backyard and entered through the front. My parents were just sitting down to breakfast, surprised I was home early. I simply told them I chose to eat breakfast with them for a change. They seemed to believe that, and no more was asked. After breakfast, I went to hang up my coat. As I opened up the closet door, a bag fell to the floor and landed at my feet. It was the carrying case for my parents' camera. I suddenly became aware that I was missing that camera. I began to panic. Where could I have left it? I ran to the garden shed and checked. The camera wasn't there. As I searched my mind for when I last had it, it dawned on me that I had left it at the mine. My heart sank. There was no way I was going there again, not even in the daylight. What I'd seen, or what I thought I'd seen, I just couldn't go back to see it again. I would have to think of a lie if my parents ever asked what happened to the camera. Fortunately, I wouldn't have to do so, as I found the camera placed on the doorstep. I was heading out to meet my friends, as I knew they would wonder what I saw. I heard a clicking and turned to see Mr. Brigson pedaling away on his bike. On the porch lay the camera, with a small note stuck around it with a rubber band. I looked at the note later. The words were in Mr. Brigson's handwriting. They were brief and blunt. "I tried to warn you." Years passed, and gradually I forgot about what happened. I went to university, got into working for a television station as an editor, and life has been good. Recently, I was looking through some old videotapes from my past and began to convert them for digital viewing to preserve the memories. That's when I came across a really old tape. One that had no name on it, and was a style that predated normal VHS tapes. This took some work to get converted, but thankfully my job had an old tape player made for that specific tape that they were getting rid of. After converting the video into a file my computer could play, I sat down to watch what this tape was about. Being such an old tape, I was unable to fix the clarity of the images, yet I was able to get a clear enough look at them. The first images were of an old engine shed appearing out of the fog. Only the sound was of my young breathing as I huffed along the path, the speakers belching out the grainy sounds of my footsteps on gravel. Memories began to come back to me. I felt my bravery rising as I watched. I was much older now. Maybe I would see how my imagination had run away from me for no reason. Maybe I could put those worries of childhood away forever at last. I internally groaned as the camera never panned up to the ceiling, but I couldn't blame my young self. I was hardly a director. Then the screen shook as I ran off, before coming to a rustling stop. By the sounds, I think I dropped the camera in a bush, leaving it recording and pointed at the shed door. Feeling like that was all that would be on this video, I began to check how long this video was. Then, some strange sound began to leak from the speakers. It was something different from the hoot of an owl in the distance or the rustle of leaves. It sounded like a slow chuff of an engine. The sound continued to grow in volume over the course of 8 long minutes. I should have stopped right there, figuring the sound was just some kind of imagined sound, or the sound of something playing in the background on my computer. But this video was the only thing playing. Then, from the darkness of the shed, behind the grainy mess, came some movement. The form of an engine slowly emerged from the darkness of the shed. It was covered in rust, its face smudged in mud and coal dust, and a trickle of blood leaking down its cheek where 2 staring, hollow eyes were. I felt a shiver run down my back. There was no engine in that shed. It was empty. I could remember that much. I thought the tape might have been too damaged to properly record, so this being wasn't there, but I knew that would be impossible. The engine sat in the middle of the screen, staring out into the night, but not seeing anything. How could it? It didn't have the eyes to stare with. For a whole 2 minutes, the engine stayed on screen, hissing and wheezing quietly over the sounds of the leaves and the birds calling in the night. Then, it slowly puffed back into the darkness of the shed, vanishing from view completely. Then, silence. That was the first and last time I saw that video. I deleted the captured footage from my computer and threw the tape in a lockbox. I felt I should have destroyed it, but I couldn't. I feel at times I should have, but something in me was telling me to keep this tape around. For what? I don't know. To prove that I'm not insane? To prove to someone that I did see a ghost or that there is something beyond this world? I don't know. Sometimes, though, I wonder if the tape had something to do with what happened later that night. I'd gone down to the pub, and who should be there but one of Mr. Brigson's grandchildren, all grown up. He recognized me, and we got to talking. Then, before the night was over, he brought up his grandfather. "Do you know my grandfather never let anyone see that shed at night?" he asked. "No," I said, lying. "Well, Granddad told me the spirit of his friend was there, trapped in torment for his crime." "What crime?" "Well, a long time ago, when the mine was working, Granddad's friend drove the engine that worked there. Some old loco from Brighton, a terrier or something. His friend was a pleasant chap who had worked his whole life at that mine, but then a terrible accident occurred. The driver was working late one night and was not paying attention to what he was doing. The firemen had headed home early, leaving only him to finish the work. The driver was too tired to put the engine back in his shed, so he left him on a siding. During the night, a large cave-in at the mine occurred. A sinkhole opened up and swallowed the engine and his trucks. The engine was lost. When the driver came to work the next day and heard the news, he was heartbroken. He felt responsible for leaving his engine parked there instead of his shed. He went to the shed where he hung himself. The mine closed shortly after, as the damage was deemed too serious to even consider reopening. Grandfather came to visit the old site sometimes, he said, to be close to where his friend died. But he said the spirit of his friend and the engine haunt the mine where they worked and died. He said he didn't want others to encounter these ghosts, as the story was too tragic. That's why he kept you and your other friends away at night. I don't know, though, 'cause Granddad always did like to tell stories, even if they weren't true. Well, I guess I'm the only one who knows how true that story really is.